Hey there, fellow Hyperspace podcast listeners. This is Tony Russo.
Hey, this is Brian.
And Shelby.
And you're listening to the Hyperspace
Pod Blast. Aren't you a little short for a podcast?
Huh? Just when you thought it was safe to turn on your podcast. Hyperspace Pod Blast is back!
And we're spoiler free!
Despite the overwhelming hype for The Last Jedi, we are taking this opportunity to talk today about fan fiction, and specifically, obviously, because that's what we do, fan fiction in Star Wars.
So if you're looking for a place to listen to Star Wars content and not be spoiled for The Last Jedi, you've come to the right place. So who do we have today, Brian?
The strange voice in the background is Mr. Tony Russo, who is... Well, actually, I'll let you introduce yourself, sir.
Well, thank you for having me. I am Tony Russo, and yes, at times I pretend to be an author, and at times I pretend to be in the Star Wars universe. And my history of writing for the Star Wars universe goes back a ways. So I hope to enlighten and amaze you with my regalia of my stories.
Excellent. So do we.
So, Tony, what motivates you to write fan fiction despite it having sort of a less than positive reputation?
Well, actually, the way I ended up writing for fan fiction was a professional gig with a license holder for Star Wars. I'm one of the few, perhaps still living contributors of the West End game Star Wars role-playing game. This happened way back in the 90s, way back in the 90s. And a friend of mine came home from a convention, and he had a pamphlet with him and says, "Do you want to write for Star Wars?" And I was like going, "No, yes, I do want to write."
Why would you even ask?
Yes, hold me back. And as it turned out that they were West End Games, which held the license for Star Wars, the role-playing game, was creating a new quarterly magazine called The Adventure Journal. They were looking for contributors. So I just kind of whipped up an idea and emailed it off to the nether regions of Honesdale, Pennsylvania. And surprisingly enough, I got a phone call back 3 days later from the editor of The Adventure Journal. His name is Peter Schweihofer. And he said that what I had written was absolutely perfect for the role-playing game. It dealt with working in parallel with the Star Wars universe. In other words, you're not really writing about the main characters. You're kind of contributing to the Star Wars universe. So I was really excited about that. So I started working with him on that, and we produced a couple of different articles, some entries, and also writing some fiction. And some of that fiction ended up getting published in a book all by its little lonesome called Tales from the Empire. And that's still available on Amazon somewhere. Yeah, we were kind of pseudo-famous for a while. I mean, because Timothy Zahn produced these three amazing first books of the New Republic era. And that was Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, I think, and I think The Last Command was the last one. And we were asked to kind of like add on to that, just create our own planets, our own characters, our own little enemies, and we ended up, being considered part of canon in some ways. And of course, when Disney finally
I'm so sorry. That's my canon sound.
Your canon sounds. And yeah, when Disney finally acquired, the licensing and everything to that, most of the extended universe of which I've written to got axed. It just kind of became legends.
Right.
And that's fine. That was perfectly fine. I was just content to write for them. And writing fan fiction helped me kind of become a much better writer. I was working with an editor, and he would give me feedback on the writing and the things that would make the story or whatever I was trying to do work. And he would bring that back to me, and I would, return that into a publishable manuscript format. So that was kind of my introduction to fan fiction. And then just this past year with the release of Rogue One and The Force Awakens, I decided to revisit those characters and places and locations that I created so far back. I wanted to kind of create a coda, an ending to those characters that I created. So I did publish some fan fiction just this past couple of months, and released it on some websites and my own website, and it's totally free. I completely understand it's the property of Lucasfilm. It belongs to them, and they can kill it at any particular moment that they want. But it's kind of like my gift back to Star Wars because it was so entertaining.
Excellent. Yeah. And I think it brings up a whole interesting point between this whole canon legends fan fiction debate. Like, people seem to think that there's a level of importance where, in my opinion, it's a desire to be in that universe. Like, it doesn't matter if someone in a suit tells me this is real and everything else is not real. It's fun to get engaged in Star Wars, regardless of, I don't know, any sort of hokey validity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, that is actually, that's pretty close to how I feel about it too. I think that, people want to be part of the universe so bad, and it's great to see the cosplayers. It's great to see people create their own things on YouTube. It's great. But when people start arguing over Rey's parentage, whatever it may be, or if she was created by the midichlorians, whatever, then I kind of switch that off. I kind of like, I don't need this debate because it's a fictional world. You want to go to the places that you'd like to visit. And, if you don't really want to end up stuck on Tatooine, you can go wherever you want. That's the joy of fan fiction. You can go different places. You can write about different things, and you can include, some of the characters that you'd like to include. Some of the things, like the recent thing that I just recently put out, it included Lando Calrissian, kind of just as a guest star. He just kind of shows up and goes, "Hey, beautiful." And he walks out.
What do we have here?
Yes, exactly. You see Billy D. Williams, once again, Hawking's Colt 45, malt liquor. And, with Lobot trailing behind him somewhere, I imagine. But it's great to touch things that are familiar. It's great to kind of mention those characters again and come back to things that people remember. It's like, I would imagine it's what people felt when they were watching The Force Awakens, and Rey and Finn are running for their lives, and she goes, "No, let's go to the other piece of junk." And of course, it's the Millennium Falcon, and everybody in the audience went, "Whoa!" Because that is the touchback. That is the familiar that everyone was looking for and hoping to see. I think that's the one thing about that particular movie that did very, very well were those touchbacks, those things that really affect the audience very personally.
Right on. I would have to agree for sure. So switching gears here back to the whole writing and the writing in fanfic specifically aspect. Do you find that writing within an existing universe is more or less restrictive than just kind of doing whatever you want to do?
I think that working with the Star Wars universe, especially with writing for the West End Games and then later for myself, you are restricted. You do find that you have to keep yourself within the bounds of things that other people are finding acceptable. Like if you invent a new Star Destroyer, join the club. I mean, everybody's creating their own new Star Destroyer. And, you kind of have to back that up with a reasoning of why that Star Destroyer was created for this specific moment. Maybe it was a very specialized purpose. West End Games created the Interdictor cruiser. I don't know if you guys remember this, but this is a special Star Destroyer that could just project gravity wells and knock ships out of hyperspace. Mm-hmm. It only showed up in the role-playing game, but then suddenly it starts to make its appearance in some other fiction, and it became very prominent in some of the other books. So you're working in somebody else's shared universe. Other people are contributing to it. People are adding to the legends and the canon, but you're also working with your own ideas. So it's restrictive, but at the same time, to me, it's liberating. It's always fun adding my own take on things.
Yeah, I always find, especially when having students write, that if you tell them, write about whatever you want, they look at you like with this deer in the headlights look. Like, what do you mean? But if you give them really kind of guidelines or sort of put them in a box, they respond to that better. So I think in a way, like what you're saying is kind of the same thing where you have, okay, I can write whatever I want, but as long as it fits in the Star Wars box.
Exactly. Yes, it does fit in the Star Wars box. And that goes also for the characters that you're creating too. When you're plotting a story, and I think that's the best thing about fan fiction is it teaches you to become a better writer. It does force you into considering that if you're just going to do dialogue back and forth, between two characters, it's extremely boring and dull. It's just sort of, no, he said this. No, she said that. No, he said this. And it suddenly just turns into this long and boring dialogue that, it sounds real in your head. But when somebody's reading something, you want to involve them. You want to make sure that your reader is also not just a spectator, but also has a stake in what's going on. And you become a better writer for it. You realize that, these two guys or whoever they are, they're aliens and they're arguing in a cantina. But meanwhile, right behind them, some spy is listening in and carefully collecting data on, in using these conversations just to shield attention away from him as he's collecting all this information, on some imperial force that's moving through or whatever. So, you're learning to work in layers and moving characters forward. You're learning plotting. You're learning how to move the story along. And, working with the role-playing game was especially helpful with that. When you're a game master, you're steering your player characters towards adventure, not boring conversation.
Yeah.
Adventure is out there. It's like, oh, yes, okay.
So, Tony, what do you think needs to exist in a story to create this framework and space for fan fiction? What aspects do you need?
I think all you really need is an idea. I mean, sometimes an idea is just all you need to create a great story. For example, I always was a huge admirer of Westerns. I loved Westerns. Star Wars is extremely adaptable to these other different kinds of genres. And the idea of these settlers, trying to find a life for themselves on a planet, and they may be moisture farmers, they may be grain farmers, there's something. But as soon as that idea hit me in the head, I said, now I need an opponent. I need somebody to be bothering these settlers for some particular reason. And it turns out to be some kind of criminal overlord. It's some kind of person who has an excuse to use these settlers, either as a cover for something worse, like something truly evil, like a slaver or, a smuggler or some pirate operation. And these poor settlers are acting as the front. They're putting on this big cheerful space for anybody who comes, investigating. And that's the instigus for the idea for the story is that, your heroic characters show up and everybody's like, hi, how are you? Welcome to Planet Claire. And, don't mind us. We're just poor innocent settlers here. And yes, don't mind the really weird curl of black smoke happening off in the distance. That's normal. That's totally normal. And, and the settlers meanwhile are giving all sorts of hints to the heroes like, please help us. We are being persecuted. So, this is all it takes is an idea. It takes an idea and you run with it. You find an applicable or a parallel consistency to what you're trying to accomplish. And I think good storytelling is always you leap off from a great idea.
Can't argue with that. So, how does fan fiction enhance the overall experience of Star Wars as both from your point of view, a creator and a consumer? Like, you hope that people read your story too, I assume. So, What do you think it does for both ways?
I sure hope people will read my story. Fan fiction is a great place to not only meet readers who are desperate to consume something. I mean, they might play with their toys. You can watch Star Wars Rebels as much as you like. You can, rewind through the things, but people want more. They want an expansion. They want to see further out. I think fan fiction provides that venue. Fan fiction gives you a chance to tell other stories that you may not be expecting. Sometimes they're a little pretentious. They're a little, as they say, the Mary Sue or the Mary Stu character who, can do everything. The one thing that poor Rey was accused of being was a Mary Sue. And it's like, I don't think that was J.J. Abrams or Lawrence Kasdan's intent at all. I think that it was trying to create something unique and different. And I think that was their intent. So fan fiction is a chance to go places, go further out, meet other different kinds of characters, maybe you may end up running into the same characters that, you've seen before. Suddenly it's Luke Skywalker and Mara Jade, and their kids. It's like, okay, let's see where this story goes. And sometimes the writer knows exactly what they're doing, and they'll lead you to a new path, a new adventure that you didn't expect. Or they're just going to do something that kind of like 50 Shades of Grey, and you're kind of like, okay, I've read quite enough, and I'm closing that story. There is the good, and then there's the bad, and then there's the ugly. And, you have to cull through some stuff to find the golden ticket. You have to go through a little bit of bad to find the good. Fan fiction is a great place to learn how to write. In some of these forums, such on Wattpad, which is one particular place, or in fanfiction.net, people are allowed to comment on your writing, within reason. And they can either say, I liked this chapter, I like these characters, I like where this thing is going. So the writer gets feedback, almost immediate feedback on how their story is progressing. Some cases, it's not gentle, and criticism is not particularly...
Such as the internet.
Yes, welcome to the internet. Yeah, there's this flaming ball of hate coming at you. And you kind of take the good with the bad. You don't want to be discouraged. You want to improve. And the only way to improve is to keep writing and also to read other things that people are recommending. And I think that is a great way to become a better writer.
Right. I think there's so much space that's created within an existing universe for someone to explore how to write, because you're not concerned with the whole concept of world building, that you get to really develop other aspects of your writing.
Yeah, it's almost like having a set of training wheels, even though that seems kind of derogatory, but I don't mean it in that kind of way. But it gives you, it's like a guide. It's like, here, like I was saying earlier about students, here, write about this. Like, take your story, whatever idea you have, and put it here instead of having to create from scratch this. And that just seems sometimes so ominous when you have an idea and like, oh, this would be really cool. And then you're like, oh, but how would that work? Why would that happen? Oh, God. Oh, never mind.
As someone who's not a writer in any stretch of the imagination, a blank sheet is so scary.
Yes.
The idea of an existing universe is much more comforting.
Yes. Blank sheets can be scary. And I've experienced that. I've experienced that too with my own work. I worked with the role-playing game and writing, and then as my editor would say, what else are you doing? It's like, I'm trying my own stories. I'm trying to get those out there. It's a little harder, and it certainly is daunting, and you don't get the feedback that you want sometimes unless you actually actively recruit beta readers or other people in your group. So fan fiction, yeah, definitely provides a framework. It provides the training wheels, and you will see some really interesting pieces from time to time that you wouldn't expect. And I wouldn't even imagine at one point. I remember when The Force Awakens came out, I think it was The Atlantic did a piece on fan fiction, and they were curious about, a writer who had just decided to write this extended relationship, back and forth between the characters of Rey and the dreaded Kylo Ren. And I was like, and people are going, oh God, no, what could this turn into? But she actually handled it with a great deal of nuance. She just went back and forth between the two different perceptions of the characters. And it was very well balanced. It was very well written. It was a surprise. And I think that's why people kept coming back for more.
Yeah, I think too, when you write in another universe or an existing IP, you have an immediate fan base, where if you're coming up with your own thing, you're just kind of like, here, read this. And they're like, why? Who are you? Why do I want to read this?
Yes.
But if you're like, here, read the Star Wars story, they're like, oh, I like Star Wars. I'll give this a shot.
Yes. And especially if it contains like an adventure or something to that people can remember or recognize, or at least a part of the Star Wars universe that they remember. That's some of the great fun of writing fan fiction, is that you can get to revisit places that people have forgotten about, like Hoth. Hey, I'm going to go take a trip to Hoth, and all you're going to find is a lot of dead wampas, a lot of snowed over vehicles, and a wrecked base. but at least it might prove to be an interesting trip because there might be something left behind that nobody ever expected. It's like, hey, what is this thing? It looks like a flashlight. Oh, Darth Vader's lightsaber. Ow, ow, ow.
So, when it comes to that C word, canon, do you prefer to write in a way that would be considered consistent with the current timeline, or do you prefer to write in what is now considered legends, or do you pick something and, choose from both timelines? How do you make those decisions?
I was given a restrictive area to work on when I was doing the role-playing game. When I started writing my own adventures, I started to think about just how I could merge some of the things that I had done in Legends and bring them up into the so-called current timeline. That was what I most recently did. I actually had to take the First Order and consider how they got there, and actually had to do some research. Oh my God, I had to do research to find out where the First Order came from and how they came about and what the importance of, I think it was the planet Jeddah. I guess it was the wrecked yard of Jeddah, wherever Rey was discovered. But I actually had to do research in order to figure out what was going on with the current timeline in order to bring my old legend characters up to speed and try to get them going on to what's happening in the galactic universe currently. My characters never really ran into any of the major characters. That's another kind of a no-no in fan fiction, is if you run into the major characters, you really do have to be really careful with how you're handling them. If a character acts or behaves in a way that's unbelievable, at least to the reader, then you've kind of broken your framework. It's like he would never do that. That's ridiculous. So
yeah, I wish I could tell that to some of the Marvel writers. But anyway.
Yes, some of those stories were really bizarre. So as a writer, you have to kind of pay attention to canon. You have to respect it, because if a character does something that's really, really not in alignment to what they've been presented as, then you're going to get negative feedback. You're going to get people kind of jumping on you. They're not going to care about the story. They're not going to care about what you're trying to accomplish. They're just going to be really nitpicky about that one character. And it's like, oh, it's driving me crazy. Why are you doing this to me?
Yeah, I can see that being an immediate turnoff. And I would probably be someone that would be guilty of doing that. Especially with these characters that, we've had for so long, we've watched, and, for the people that are into Legends have read about some of their other adventures, like, we feel like we really know those characters. So if you're going to work with them, you kind of have to do it correctly and do it with the right amount of, respect, I guess, or people are really going to be immediately turned off.
Right. Then you're really going to be labeled almost horribly as an amateur.
Oh, God.
God forbid.
No. The pain.
Which is so interesting when you do dabble in those, main characters, but you get them right, and how much of a hit that is.
That's
I would
true.
say, we've been playing the Battlefront 2 campaign. The writing for Luke is just so good.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how that resonates when you do get those characters quote unquote right, or whatever that right would be for the most number of people.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think too, we have a couple of friends who do a fan fiction comic book. It's called a Star Wars comic, and I think they have a really good finger on the pulse of how to play with some of those existing characters, and that's kind of what makes them shine. Where if they were doing the same thing, the same art and everything, but they didn't quite get the voices right, I don't think they would be nearly as popular as they are.
Right, and that actually sounds like it's almost twice as much work. I mean, a fan fiction comic. I mean, yes, because there's a design. Yeah, there's a design thing behind Star Wars. You got to get those ships looking right. I mean, I've done that for my son a billion times. It's like when we're bored at some TGI Fridays, I would take the little coloring thing that they would give him, and I flip it over, and I would start doing like a Star Wars battle. I would start drawing a little Star Wars battle. My 5-year-old son, he didn't care what my X-Wings and my TIE Fighters looked like. But, doing a Star Wars fan fiction, that must be much more difficult getting those character designs right.
Yeah, and they do a really good job too. Not to super brag them up or anything, but I would check it out. It's pretty good.
Yeah, what is your advice, I guess, to people who are interested in either consuming or even writing fan fiction?
I would, if they're interested in writing and they want to try fan fiction, I would say yes, they should definitely pick something that they're really interested in writing about. It doesn't have to be just Star Wars. If they're interested in anime, if they're interested in, any kind of particular subject that, they just keep coming back to time and time again, I think that writing is a great way to express yourself. It's a great way to get your creativity, your creative juices flowing. And you can carry those things that you learn about fan fiction writing into your own writing and in your own personal writing. And I've met some people who said, I really like to try writing. I have some ideas. And I said, why don't you just pick something that's familiar to you and try to put yourself in, either that subject or something that you think that you feel like you're more comfortable in. If you're interested in Firefly, write Firefly. If you like to keep those characters going, keep going. I think that fan fiction is a great jumping off point for writers. And as far as discovering great fan fiction, you really have to kind of be careful where you go. Fanfiction.net is a great place. I used to put a lot of my work out on Wattpad. And just until recently, I actually started removing it from Wattpad because the site wasn't really doing what I hoped it would do, and that was expand my own readership. But I want people to understand that not all fan fiction is, gooey or, just a lot of attention or what they call fan service to certain characters, the Draco Malfoy Harry Potter thing, and oh no, not that again. I think that people want to try themselves out as writers, can do a great thing by putting on this coat that kind of helps them understand how to become a better writer by observing and watching others and reading their writing. If you want to write more Tolkien, go to the fan fiction forums and read more Tolkien. If you want to understand more about fantasy, if you want to understand more about science fiction or your favorite television show, it's out there. And there's actually a need for these things. And I don't find the stigma about writing fan fiction. It just doesn't really, I don't feel it applies to me. I enjoy what I'm writing. I enjoy people writing back and the commentary that comes back and forth. And I feel that it just makes me a better writer.
Excellent. Yeah, I would agree. I kind of hate the negative connotation that fan fiction has unfortunately gained for itself. I don't think it's fair, just like anything else. There's, like you said earlier, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So there's good out there. There's still good in there.
There's still good in there.
Yeah, I think that's about all the time we have. So, Tony, why don't you tell the good people of the internet where they can find you?
They can find me. I'm on Twitter. I'm at Rocket9 Studio. That's one place that they can find me. I'm sometimes on Twitter. I have a Facebook profile, like most authors. If you look on Facebook and look for Tony Russo, author, oh, good grief. You might actually be surprised and find me there. And I have a blog that I've been trying to update recently with my own written works, as well as I recently re-uploaded my last Star Wars fan fiction. And that's at tonyrusso.rocket9studio.com/Red Moon Rising, red-moon rising. And that's my full-blown Star Wars novel.
There you go.
Totally free. Totally free, dude.
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely check him out. I haven't made my way through the whole thing because I just found him myself. So I am enjoying it, though. And yeah, it's free, like you said. So if you've been wanting to either dip your toe in fan fiction or just the Star Wars expanded universe in general, now you can kill two birds with one stone. Bada bing, bada boom.
Bada bing.
Awesome. And as always, you can find us at hyperspace_pod on Twitter.
And email us at hyperspacepodblast@gmail.com.
Or find us on the internet, hyperspacepodblast.com.
Yeah, and we are taking submissions for fan fiction and things like that for the website. So if you got something brewing in your head, get it out. Let us know. We'll put it up.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast, Tony.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. It was a blast, and we will see you all later.
Bye.